Hello, everyone. Welcome to our very, very special webinar today on how to recognize the adjustments that you need in your workplace. This is a really biggie today, this webinar. And I'm absolutely delighted to be inviting the CEO from Disability Rights UK, Kamran Mallick, who I will introduce to you in a little while. But first of all, just to give you a little bit of some house rules on today's webinar. This is open for all. It's interactive. We're going to have the chat box open. We're also going to have the Q&A open at the end. So we would really love to hear your stories. What are your challenges, your frustrations, your concerns in the world of work? Do you know what your disability rights are? We would really like for you to share those stories and those comments with us, because I will share them with Kamran as we journey through today's webinar. This is part of a series of webinars that we post onto our Evenbreak Hive, which is a 24/7 access free website for all to use, and it's stacked full of lots of articles and tools to help support you look for that job, and also whilst you're in that job as well. So please have a look if you haven't checked it out already. Go along to the Hive and it's free access for all. Now, this webinar is going to be recorded. So don't worry if you don't get everything. You can watch this a little bit later, because we will be sending it and placing it onto the Hive. We do have our captions writer today, so I wanted to welcome Claire. Claire, thank you very much for joining us. And currently at the moment, we are waiting for our BSL captions lady to join us. So my apologies that she's not here presently at the moment. I'd also like to thank Toby, who's our executive producer. He's sort of sitting in the background, making sure that this webinar runs smoothly. So just wanted to do a quick test with the caption writings and make sure that everything's all good to go. Fabulous. There will be a feedback survey at the very end of this webinar. We would really love your insights on what you found to be beneficial. We want to also share that with Kamran as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So I want to introduce you to the fabulous Kamran Mallick from Disability Rights UK. Thank you very much for joining us, Kamran. A little bit about Kamran. He's the Chief Executive of Disability Rights UK, the only UK-wide disabled people's organisation, as well as a trustee. He a trustee of the large, vibrant theatre, the Lyric in Hammersmith, and a small disability charity, Wheels for Wellbeing. Kamran, I don't know how you do it. You're involved in everything, but you're also an influential leader in a highly politicised area of disability rights. So Kamran has represented the UK disability movement at the UN, creating a coalition of civil society organisations. He's also done a lot of consultation and consulting, ensuring that our disability rights is at the very heart and centre. Kamran, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Can you also share with us a little bit more about yourself, some stories? Why do you do the work that you do?
Hi, Rosa. Thank you so much. Firstly, thank you for inviting me. So pleased to be here. And I know I can't see all the members of that who are listening, but welcome to everybody as well. So please, you can join us. Rosa, thank you for that introduction. And I guess your question was, how do I do it all? It keeps me busy, doesn't it? So, so your question was, why do I do it, or who am I? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So who am I? So I guess my name's Kamran, and I was at the age of 3 years of age, I caught the polio virus and left me unable to walk. So I'm a wheelchair user. And so my life perspective is as a disabled person, a wheelchair user. And I think all the way up to, my first job, I experienced very starkly the kind of inequalities and discrimination that I as an individual experience. And when I used to compare that to what life was like for my two brothers who are non-disabled, I could just, see what the differences were with the things and opportunities that they had versus what I could have. So I remember my older brother going and working for, on a Saturday job while he was still studying. Wasn't available to me. I could never do that. No one wanted to give me that opportunity. And I eventually found myself working in the third sector, the charitable sector, the non-profit sector. It's got several names. And that's where I found my community. I found kind of other disabled people who were challenging government, who were speaking out. And I thought, that's where I want to be, because the inequality that I was experiencing, thousands and thousands, if not millions of people were experiencing. And if we think about, disabled people around the world, the figure is there's more than 1 billion disabled people. That's 15% of the world's population. So we're not a small group, we're a big group. And we're here and we matter because we're here, and we're part of our communities. And so that's where I've spent my whole kind of career to now, working for and kind of wanting to bring about rights and equality and justice for disabled people, to create this inclusive world. We've got a long way to go. We've come a long way as the movement has, but we've still we're on that journey, and kind of that's what keeps me interested, passionate, excited. Plus, you get strength from each other. So talking to people like yourself and others brings strength to that.
What a fabulous story that is. And it's interesting to hear how, from a very, very, very young age, how this impacted you, and it's really informed the person that you are today, because this is the space that you really want to make a difference in. And I think on behalf of everyone, we just want to say thank you very much for being the CEO of Disability Rights UK. We need you so much. It's incredible, the stories that certainly myself and some of our other careers advisors hear from our candidates. The lack of awareness about what their rights are, or even the way in which they have been treated in the past, and it's really left quite a legacy and a devastating effect upon them. So we really do and are keen for you to really share and educate us today. So thank you for that, Kamran. Tell us a little bit about what Disability Rights UK does.
Sure. So it's kind of in our name. We're a rights-based organization. And so we're the kind of largest disabled people-led organization. So that's a really important aspect. Our board of trustees and the majority of our staff are all disabled people. And that's really important because we use our lived experience to advocate and speak out on all the issues that we believe matter to us from our kind of life experience. We're a membership organization, so any of your kind of members listening right now could become an individual member of DRUK, and what you're doing is you're adding to this movement of people, of disabled people, that are saying what we have isn't right and fair. We want equality, rights, and justice for ourselves, and bringing that collective voice together is incredibly powerful. We then have members who are organizational members, so disabled people's organizations who represent local disabled people are members of DRUK as well. So all of that collective voice gives us all that intelligence of what's going on the ground, what life is like. And then inside the organization, we have a fantastic policy team headed up by our head of policy, Fazile Hardy. And their job is to listen to what people are telling us, look at what's going on around the country, and kind of advocate, speak out about the inequalities that they're seeing on any particular issue. It could be employment, it can be housing, transport, kind of any aspect of our life, really. So we use the voice of disabled people through our policy work to bring about change. And then the other bit that we do is about, part of the membership deal that we have is to say to disabled people, one of the best things we can help you with is to make sure that you're familiar with your rights, that you have access to information. So on our website, we have a wealth of data and information and fact sheets that if you have a look at them, they tell you about what your rights are and how to kind of use your rights to to challenge discrimination. So it's giving power to disabled people, listening to disabled people, and then using all of that to bring about change.
Fantastic. We've just put that in the chat box, Kamran, for everyone, if they want to find out a little bit more about your policy and your campaigns. And we know that you've got a great section that shares, it's got lots of fact sheets, an alphabetical order of, basically everything that you really need to know with regards to your rights. And you've broken it down into many different sectors. We've sort of focused on the one to do with the working world, because that's the space that we play in here. Thank you very much for sharing that. So if people want to get actively involved and support you, how can they do that?
So there's a number of ways you can. I would encourage everybody to sign up to our electronic newsletter, which goes out every Thursday and Friday morning. There's no charge for that. You can just go to our website, sign up, and you'll receive that every week. And that will keep you up to date with all the kind of pertinent issues, things that we're working on, highlighting kind of matters that we believe are relevant to disabled people, but also celebrating when there are some really great, fantastic news stories about what disabled people are doing and achieving, whether that might be in business or employment or anything else. It's kind of a combination. And then also you will sometimes see opportunities for you to get involved. It might be to have input into a consultation. It might be a job opportunity that one of our member organizations has put out there. We will put it in there. So there's lots of information that's worth doing.
Fantastic.
And you can also get involved in terms of kind of, we run lots of training courses and things, and there may be things that might be of interest or relevance to people.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I see that Carol has just joined us. Carol, thank you very much for joining us. Carol is our BSL lady. Here's something for you.
Apologies for arriving late.
That's okay, Carol. That's no problem. So this is from Lawrence. Okay, I'm just going to share this. If I have worked, I have no real support either, because I don't know how I could get some support and the support that I do need. I did work at a care home, a childcare, retail, didn't get any support in any of them. It was all left to myself, which was okay. May have got a little bit with the care home, but not really. I was left to my own devices. So I suppose that's really Lawrence wanting to understand what's his rights within the workplace. So it sort of leads us on to our next question, our topic, which is, knowing our basic rights. The Equality Act of the United Nations Convention and the Disability Act, they're all here to help enforce and promote and protect our rights. Can you explain our employment rights under these, please?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for sharing that kind of experience. And I think it's important to first say is that that's not unheard of. We hear that a lot, that disabled people will often find that they don't get the support that they need and require and actually have a right to under the law. So the Equality Act 2010 is a piece of legislation that brings together all of the equalities legislations into one piece of legislation called the Equality Act 2010. And prior to that, we had something called the Disability Discrimination Act that came into force in 1995. And certainly I think it's interesting that in my lifetime, the earlier years in my lifetime, there was no legislation that protected my rights. It was actually okay to discriminate against me because there was nothing in law that said that. So disabled people campaigned and lobbied and worked really hard to get this bit of legislation in place. It's not perfect, but it's not terrible either. The Equality Act, when I look at it and when I speak to lawyers, I often say it's a good piece of legislation. I think where it falls down is its enforcement. There isn't very good enforcement of the Act. And I think that's where it's really important that we as disabled people learn more about the Act, understand what it is and what our rights are. So what the Act says under employment bit in kind of summary is that you have the right to what's called in the Act, this idea of reasonable adjustments. And it offers these reasonable adjustments to anybody who fits this definition of what and who a disabled person is. And it often applies to you, even if you don't think of yourself as a disabled person. You may have a health condition that you just think is, it's a health condition, I'm not a disabled person. But the Act says is if that condition, health condition, or your disability is likely to last for more than 12 months, so more than a year, the impact of that it is substantial, the impact, and that it has an substantial and adverse impact on your day-to-day living, then you are likely to be covered by the piece of legislation, the Equality Act. And under employment section, you have a right to request reasonable adjustments. And quite rightly, people say to me, well, what's reasonable? And that's part of the problem, isn't it? It's what's reasonable for me might not be reasonable for someone else. And the way UK legislation works is by what's called case law. So when disabled people have gone to court and been successful for a experience of discrimination, that kind of becomes case law and helps to define where things are reasonable and not reasonable. But in essence, what the Act is trying to say and what it's trying to do is say, what are the barriers that you experience to flourish in the workplace? So if you compared yourself to a non-disabled person in the workplace, in your workplace, what are the things that get in your way? It could be the building, it could be the physical environment, it could be the layout of the office space, it could be the height of desks, it could be kind of background noise. So, you know, open plan offices can often have lots of chatter and noise from the from people that could actually prevent someone, you know, who's autistic or has a hearing impairment, and so on. Those are barriers, and the Act says it's the employer's obligation is to remove them. So they need to take action to remove those barriers. So the obvious ones are things like, for me as a wheelchair user, would be powered doors instead of heavy doors that I can't open, ramps and lifts instead of steps. Yeah. Those kind of things. Now, I remember when I first went into the world of work, people said to me, well, what adjustments do you want? I was thinking, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like yet. I need a bit of time to work that out, don't I? But what we've now got is something called Access to Work. And Access to Work is a government scheme that is designed to help you think through your job and look at what the possible kind of barriers might be in order for you to fulfill your job description. And part of that can also be an assessment. So someone can come and have a conversation with you, someone independent, and say, right, what is your job role? And let's talk through what we think some of the barriers might be and what some of the solutions might be. So for me, in order for me to get to work and travel for work, I get support with travel. So a mini cab gets me to work and back home. And I've also got a lightweight laptop because I can't carry very heavy objects. So that Access to Work supported me by providing me some of those bits of kit. But it can also be human support. Someone can have access to human support. So someone to assist you in doing certain physical things that maybe you can't do yourself. So they're not allowed to kind of do the job for you, but help you complete your job tasks. So the Equality Act is all about what are the barriers and how do we remove them? And there are what's called anticipatory requirements, and anticipatory basically means it's up to an employer should be thinking about what are the barriers in the way that we do things that would prevent disabled people from coming and working for us. They mustn't just sit back and wait and think, oh, well, you know, when someone tells us, we'll make a change. They're supposed to be doing it beforehand. And it all starts from the point of when they put a job advert out, the whole recruitment process, which I know you at Evenbreak are really familiar and kind of advocating for inclusive recruitment, all the way through to interview, induction, and then doing your job. But it goes further than that. It's also about, you know, if you imagine work is having a social event that they're inviting everybody to.
At Downing Street?
Yeah, well, it's all the rage. I think we should all get into it. So if work's having a do, it might be, you know, a celebration or something, they have an obligation to make sure that the way they kind of set it up, design it, structure it, that it's accessible, because it's part of their work responsibility. I notice when I go to certain work type events, functions, events, you know, when you have a buffet, a meal, and the problem often is, how do I get from the buffet with a plate to a table somewhere that's a long way away, or may even not exist? And, you know, I've often been at events where they have those stand-up tables. It's no good to me. It's inaccessible. So what I end up doing is sitting with my plate in the corner somewhere. That's not right. Shouldn't, you know? So it's things like that as well.
Okay, it's really interesting because you've brought up access to work. Is this in tandem with what the employer will offer as a reasonable adjustment, or in lieu of? Because we know that access to work can help with assistive technology, like you've just mentioned, Yes, a travel arrangement. So we have mobility challenges, and with coaches, mental health coaches, autism coaches, ADHD coaches, etc. They sort of cover that whole area. So do they pick up where the employer's left off, or where the employer can't support an employee? Where's the link there? Just explain that to us.
Sure. So the employer can't say that, I have no obligations and therefore I'm not going to do anything. If access to work can provide it, fantastic. The employer absolutely has obligations on the Act. So, if the employer has chosen to be in a building that's inaccessible or has inaccessible features built within it, that access to work are not going to fix that. They're not going to say, well, okay, we'll move you into another building. That's an employer's obligation. They have to be thinking about where they're placed, how accessible their building is, the criteria that it meets, that it has to meet in terms of buildings. Evacuation processes, for example, is a classic one. That's down to the employer. Your safety is down to the employer. Access to work is there to say where someone needs some additional bit of equipment or something that's unique to their health condition and barrier, then it will supplement that. But even then, it's not quite clear cut as that, because if you imagine you're a big employer, like one of the big high street banks, access to work quite rightly would say to them, well, actually, we'll do the assessment, but the employer needs to make a contribution here, because why shouldn't they? They have the resources and they should be making the contribution. But a much smaller employer, like a small charity, who maybe doesn't have the financial resources, access to it will often then say, okay, we'll cover that cost for you for that piece of kit. The classic one is with laptops. Most of us who work now would have a laptop, would expect to have one, but access to work helped with mine because the ones that Disability Rights UK can purchase are too heavy for me still, and they don't have the resources to always buy the lightest one. So access to work kind of top that up. Say, well, Disability Rights UK spends, I don't know, let's say £500 a laptop, we'll top it up by another £500 to £1,000 to buy the right one.
Sure. So I think the point we want to get across here, guys, is it's a free scheme. It's a grant. You do not pay for it back. The employer does not fully pay for it. They may have to pay maybe maximum up to 20%, so they top up. So just know that there really should be no barrier. You get to make the application. So if you are an entrepreneur, or if you're starting a new job, or maybe you're even already in the job, you can start your application now. I know that Toby's just put up the link Access to Work. So please check that out. And Cameron's given us a lovely description of what is possible here. You will get an advisor and they will help assist you to work out what's possible. So please do check out that link. I also want to share, Cameron, someone else has brought something up. Monet, thank you for joining us. It can be challenging to maintain a positive outlook while working through the barriers to work, particularly when employers are sluggish to put reasonable adjustments in place. These barriers can wear you down, especially when you have an energy limiting condition. Disabled employees often end up leaving. Is there a way to take a pause? Now, what I wanted to do here, Monet, thank you so much for this honest appraisal. Kamran, share some other stories. Monet is not alone, right? You probably get callers coming in and they're telling you this sort of stuff. What stories are you hearing? What's going on out there at the moment?
Yeah, so we hear a lot, Monet. Thank you for sharing that. And your story is not unfamiliar to us and to our organization. So we do hear a lot of disabled people leaving work because either the employer is not willing to bring in adjustments as quick as should be there, and also kind of access to work itself can be a bit of a challenge sometimes to kind of get into place as well. So all of those things are frustrating, are kind of energy sapping in themselves before you even think about your own health condition while trying to maintain the job. So I really recognize that. I wish I had a simple answer to say if you did this, that would happen. What I would say is always contact organizations like ours. And if we can't help you ourselves, we will know of other organizations, particularly under the legal route, who might be able to support you to take some action. because sometimes, unfortunately, that's where we have to go in order to get some action taken by the employer. But I would say it's it's always in the it's always strikes me, it's always in the interest of the employer for you to flourish in the workplace. They've employed you to do a job. It's in their interest that you're enabled to do that job. And what I would say is, think about how you might have that conversation with your manager and where you might get support in the business. Is there a disabled people staff network, for example? Can you engage with that to get some support? Can you do you feel someone in HR you might be able to talk to about it? And some businesses and organizations have union representation. Connect with the union and see if you can get some support that way as well. So there are some avenues you can look at, but completely understand.
Kamran, are there, there seems to be it's a growing thing, disability advocates, so people who may be able to advocate, and that's exactly actually what your organization do. But can we invite an advocate into the room with us if we have a challenging situation with the employer? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can. It's kind of your right to, if you feel that you need an advocate to help articulate what something is feeling like, particularly because often the impact of exclusion, the impact of discrimination can be really difficult to have to keep telling people. It kind of hurts, it's emotionally charged. And as has been described, it's kind of quite exhausting to have to do it all the time. So I think, you can absolutely request an advocate to come with you. What I would also say to people is connect with your local disabled people's organization. They will often have advocacy services. They will have people who might be able to support you with advice and knowledge and kind of how to articulate the issue that you're having. And the other one website I would suggest you have a look at is a website that Disability Rights UK set up called Right to Participate. And I will send you the link, Rosa, maybe that could be sent out. It's a website that tells you about the Equality Act and how to take action under employment issues. And there are template letters, for example, that you can just fill in the blanks.
Fantastic.
And use to kind of write.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very, very supportive. We'd really appreciate that. I sort of want to drill down now, adjustments, right? What exactly does that mean? Who can seek adjustments? When can we seek adjustments? There's a big process, right? The recruitment process is, well, first of all, we've got to find the job. Then we got to apply for the job. Then we might get shortlisted. So there may be the interview. Then there might be an assessment that we have to do. And then if we're successful, there's the job offer. And then there's the onboarding. There's so many pieces to the puzzle. When do we ask for adjustments? How can we ask? Who should we ask? This is almost a whole webinar in itself, but I'm just going to let you share with us your insights on that one.
Sure. So the adjustments process should start at the point when you're about to apply for a role. And actually, I forgot to mention earlier on when we were talking about access to work, you can seek access to work support if you feel you will need that support in the interview process. So it could be, for example, as we have today, Carol, a BSL interpreter, if you are deaf, who would accompany you into the interview. But it could be other things. And I have had experience of supporting someone with a learning disability to have a kind of an advocate in the interview to enable them to be supported. So there are the kind of requirement to make adjustments and reasonable adjustments under the law starts at the point of when you're applying for a job. So if the way that the employer requires you to apply is discriminatory, you should raise that with them. So for example, quite often companies will say, well, we only accept online applications. Well, okay, but first thing is not all of us have the latest computer equipment or mobile phones that we can use to apply, but also, is the website accessible? Is the process that you're going through to apply online actually accessible to you? And by that, I mean, does it work with screen reading software, for example, or speech recognition software like Dragon and so on? If it doesn't, there's an obligation on the employer to kind of make the adjustment. And so that idea carries on throughout the whole process. So in the interview, if you're having to do, let's say, a written test, and you require more time because of the barrier that you experience with writing, or you need some additional help, equipment to be able to fulfill that test. Well, it's their obligation, they have to do that. And your question was, when do we ask for that? My advice, I guess what I've always done is I've always been very honest and open at the outset. Say, I am a disabled person, these are the barriers I experience, weighing that up with all the positives that you bring, of course, the wealth of knowledge and experience and adaptability and all the things that we have. And I understand for a lot of people, there's a fear that if I say something like that, well, I won't even get through the door. And that can happen. And it's often and this is where it's very difficult to then prove that it happened because you said that. But I think otherwise, I think you're going to go through a process where you might actually really struggle and then kind of have a very bad experience. Or you might decide to tell someone at the point when they invite you to an interview. So that you've done an application, you've written a letter, you've done all of that, you get the invite, that's when you might say, okay, in order to do this, I want to check some things with you. And then, of course, that carries on in the journey. So once, if you're then successful, and the onboarding, as you described it, and your first day, I would say that after the interview and you've been offered a role, it's important to then have that conversation with whoever has informed you that they're going to offer you the role, to think about, well, what is the role going to entail? Where will I be based? What equipment might I be expected to use? And kind of have that conversation about adjustments that you feel you might need. And often a lot of it we know just from our everyday life, whether it's seating or lighting, ambient noise, the kind of laptop keyboard that you might need. If you need to build in rest breaks, so if you have chronic fatigue, for example, you might need to be saying, well, actually, I can't do 9 to 5 without proper rest breaks, and kind of talk that through with the employer. And those can be quite difficult conversation, can't they? Because it feels like you're having to justify things to someone, but actually the law is on your side. And I think that's where it's really important to be clear about what the law says. And there are lots of helpful guides on our website, the Right to Participate website as well. And I guess it never really ends, this idea of making adjustments and making reasonable adjustments. And because your job inevitably over time will change. The pandemic hit us 2 years ago, completely changed the way we were working. And while for years, we as disabled people have been saying we want flexible working, we want to be able to work from home, businesses were saying, well, that's just not possible. It's not going to work. How can that even happen? And yet here we are, all working from home. But it's then important that we have the right access to equipment and things at home as well.
Absolutely. And that's where we can also be supported in the home, right? Because it's your workspace. So just remember that, guys, whether you're in an office or whether you're at home, you can still be supported from access to work, and also from your employer as well.
Yeah, the duty under the Equality Act comes with you. If you're working from home, the onus on the company is the same. They have to have a duty of care, but they also have to help make the adjustments that you might need in the work, because that becomes your workplace if the employer is expecting you to work from home.
It's so important for us to be our own advocate, and I think you're demonstrating this so much. Yes, there are all these acts that protect us. It was interesting because I looked at a survey on well-being and wellness in the workplace by the CIPD. And one of the striking things from that survey, Kamran, was that middle management, line managers really had an unawareness around disability. So their disability awareness or neurodiversity awareness was lacking. So that becomes a barrier for us, right? How do we manage that?
Yeah, these are difficult things to tackle, aren't they? Because they often feel so huge. And, I often think, well, is it the job of an employee to have to tackle these massive issues?
Yeah.
I think the first thing is to have those conversations with colleagues. Find the trusted people in the business who you feel you trust and that they trust you, and that you have a connection with someone who kind of understands from your perspective. Try and get some support that way. Organizations often have disability support groups, disability kind of networks. It's important to kind of engage with those. But you're right, managers, middle managers often don't understand, fear it, and are kind of scared of it, the whole issue. And rather than kind of tackling it, understanding, learning, what they often do is walk away from it. So they don't want to deal with this topic, and that's difficult. And I think as a disabled person, if you feel strong enough to have those conversations with your manager and with your team, that's really important. But organizations like DRUK, Disability Rights UK, one of the things that we do is we deliver disability inclusive training, disability qualities training, and how to be an inclusive workplace, how to create a culture of inclusivity, of diversity, and how to value those as genuine benefits to your business, and what it means to be an inclusive employer. And that starts from removing one of the barriers which you just described, is people's attitudes and assumptions about who we are and what we do. So we do lots of those kinds of training ourselves. And you might want to suggest to your company, your employer, how about we bring someone in? You know, let's reach out to an organization like Disability Rights UK, but there are many others who do it as well, to bring them in to run some sessions, because you want not just your managers to have an understanding and awareness, but you want your colleagues to have an awareness and understanding. And I remember in my first job, it was quite tiring that it was always me who had to raise the disability issue. I wanted my friends and colleagues to sometimes take it away from me and say, actually, I'm going to raise it because it affects my friend or my colleague. And it can be quite tiring and burdensome that as a disabled person, you're always having to raise the same issues again and again and again. And that's where kind of support from your colleagues is really important, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely. It's everyone's responsibility, right? We all want each other to be well and thrive in the world of work. It makes sense. Here's just some feedback from everyone. Extremely useful, very interesting. This is very informative. Thank you, Kamran. We also have Vanessa. As a neurodivergent person, it can sometimes be difficult to know what adjustments work for me, as I have spent my life developing coping mechanisms to compensate, hide my disability. So that's all about the masking that we do, the performance that we put on, and often only realize something is supporting me at work once I've trialed it for a while. Similar to getting my first pair of glasses. Previously, I would have simply sat closer to the TV, not aware that I could see much further with a pair of glasses, i.e. just supports. Do you happen to have any resources, advice available for examples of reasonable adjustments specific to neurodivergence? Now, I can certainly say that there is a website. It's an American website, but it's called the Jobs Accommodation Network site. It's absolutely incredible. It's got every single condition that there is. It's in the A to Z section. You can scroll down to your particular condition, and it actually does give some strategies and support tools to help, but it also breaks it down into different areas. So maybe you have attention or memory challenges. Maybe you have energy, challenges as well. And it breaks it down by each section, and it actually talks about the adjustments that you can seek. So if we get a chance, Toby, it'd be great if you could put that into the chat. But I want to defer back to Kamran. Kamran, do you have any resources on your site, or are you familiar or aware of support tools or helping people who are neurodiverse to make reasonable adjustments? I mean, of course, there's diversity and diversity, isn't it? My neurodiversity will be different from someone else's because we're all pretty unique. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so absolutely. You're absolutely right, Rosa, that, one person's barriers as someone who's neurodiverse will be different to somebody else, but there will always and quite often be similarities and overlaps as well. So I think it in a way, it's no different to a visible disability in terms of the barriers. It's about understanding them. I think the challenge is often the kind of the masking that you describe and how people, I think if you have a hidden impairment, you make a judgment call, don't you, about should I disclose it? Because if I disclose it, am I going to have a negative experience? And therefore, why would I disclose it? I'll just put up with it. Versus if I think I'm going to get some benefit, I would like to disclose it. And one of the things we've seen over the years is disabled students who are going through higher or further education will start have disclosure rates for things like dyslexia are much higher now. And the reason they're high is because people know that if they disclose that, they will get things like additional time to complete tasks or exams. They will get access to equipment and software that will enable them to take notes and kind of read documents. So there's a win there because it's about removing those barriers. Whereas prior to that, it was a case of you were seen as stupid, and therefore, why would you disclose that? So people didn't. So I think today, what would I say? Well, the first thing is kind of really understand how your neurodiverse condition affects you, and see, you might even want to make a bullet list of saying, these are the barriers that I experience in a day-to-day environment because of my neurodiverse condition, and be really clear about those. And so look those up and really understand them. You try and talk to your employer, but in positive terms about what you feel you will achieve if they make the adjustments that you need in order to flourish. So be really positive. We don't want to go in and say, well, I really struggle in this space and I really can't do that and I can't do this. Actually saying, I find this environment difficult, but if we could change it, then I can fulfill my role really well, and I can be the kind of the best I can be.
But fantastic tips. It's about, identifying the supports you need, but also letting them know that this is where you're going to thrive and flourish. It's not as though it's a negative thing. It's a very positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes it may come to the point that, some kind of a letter or something from a medical professional might be needed or might be helpful. But really, I always think you want to have conversations with your employer about how you can be the very best you can for them and the adjustments that they make.
And it's really interesting that you've just said that, because we've just had, another message here from Lawrence, and I really feel his pain. He was talking about people complaining about his speed or errors he was making. He said, I tried a lot, but one person would still complain about my speed, which is part of the reason why I left the care home. And I'm sort of thinking here, Lawrence, if you knew you had access to work, assistive technology, the text to speak stuff, if there was neurodiversity training in that care home, that probably could have made a big difference. Because I'm very sorry to hear your story, but the solutions that Kamran's just come up with really could have helped you on that particular occasion. So this really is a responsibility of everyone, isn't it, Kamran? Someone else was asking here, does the disability inclusive training apply to businesses or organizations?
So the one that we deliver, we can tailor it to anybody. So we do everything from high street supermarkets to financial businesses, all the way through to organizations, charities and such, but also to public sector organizations like the NHS provisions as well. So it's kind of very broad. It can be tailored, and that's generally what we do, is we would tailor it to the business.
Yeah. And when you say tailored, that could be to one or to all, that could be to senior management, right down to other employees, right? So it's for everyone, it's inclusive.
Yeah, so what the approach that we like to take with our training consultancy is to say to a business, we could come in and deliver some training and that will have some impact, but actually what you really want to do is to have affect kind of cultural change in the business, which is more than just one piece of training. You really want a longer term plan to say, how are we going to be more inclusive throughout our business? And that could be, how we recruit, how we retain staff, how we train and value staff, how our policies and processes operate in the business. So for example, as a disabled person, sometimes I get the flu and I need some time off, but there are other times when I need time because that's related to my health condition, my disability. And we look at them separately, because otherwise you can fall foul of the kind of sickness leave very quickly if you've got some health, your health condition related issues.
What I wanted to ask you now is, okay, so say I'm in a job, right? But redundancy is looming. How am I protected if I'm in a if I'm going to be called up for redundancy? How does these acts or policies apply to us, to our community?
Yeah, so I mean, there's whole. So I'm not a lawyer, but there's a whole. The employment legislation has a whole section around redundancy processes, and ACAS is a good organisation to look at their website, because that will talk about how a redundancy should be happening, what good redundancy processes are. Sometimes it's inevitable that we will get made redundant, and I've been made redundant in previous roles. The important thing to what the legislation starts to do is say, were you made redundant because you're a disabled person, or were you made redundant because the organization had a reorg, or they didn't have enough funds, and they did a fair assessment of the roles that should be made redundant, those that should be kept in for business reasons. And the law tries to say, well, actually, were you picked on? So, were you picked out and said, oh, well, we'll get rid of Cameron because, he's a disabled person. We don't really want him here, and it'd be an easy way to get him out. That's illegal. That would be unfair dismissal. And so the law protects that bit of it. Plus, the redundancy process has to be accessible as well. So you have to have, the adjustments in the process to enable you to articulate kind of from your side. So that's really the important key aspect is, was it fair? And or were you kind of identified because of your health condition or as a disabled person? And, we've heard stories from people who say that I disclosed to my employer that I had cancer, and then suddenly I was the one who was on my way out. And, can that link be made between that person's diagnosis and then them having to leave? And that it can be a very difficult time when you're being made redundant. It does happen, but it's about, was it done in a fair way? And the employers do have an obligation that goes over and above how they might treat other employees, because they have to take into account that if by making you redundant, it's going to take you longer to find work as well. And there's data around that. So there's lots of things to play here.
And so they also have a responsibility too, don't they, to support you in finding another opportunity, etc.
Yeah.
So there's an onus and a responsibility there. Like that would be available for everyone, regardless of disability or neurodiversity or not. Still lots more coming in the chat. I'm going to try and get through everything, guys. Rosa, could you please put the name of that US website? Yes, I will, Jane. I'll just do that shortly after I get some more comments out, because I'm just conscious of time. Very few people like the open plan environment, but it's very difficult environment for the neurodiverse. Where's the line between want and need when it comes to adjustments? I think that talks to what you were saying earlier, Cameron, about reasonable.
Yeah, it would be to see, well, what's reasonable? Is it reasonable for a company that's kind of always had this open plan culture to suddenly change? You've got 1,000 employees working in an open plan. But there may be some adjustments that could be made. So I've seen, people wearing headphones, for example, to mask out the noise. That's one adjustment that could be made. It could be that, you can get those soundboards that could be set up so that there's some sound absorption to get rid of reflective noise. Those kind of things can be done. And it's that same thing. One is about reasonable, but actually, again, it's that whole conversation to say, look, in order for me to be the best here, this is what I need. And it's that kind of conversation, negotiation with your employer. But the law does talk about reasonable adjustments. Yeah.
It could even be maybe if it's a flexible space that you can work remotely, if working from home gives you that quiet space. It's really just about having that conversation, creating that conversation and explaining the why and how it can be supportive.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We have a member of staff who, when they joined us, they used to come into the office and their health condition changed. and they requested that actually I'd like to change my place of work to my home.
Mm-hmm.
And because we had all the technical systems in place, that was a reasonable adjustment from our side, and they work from home, and the work outcomes are just as good, if not better, because they're not having to travel and have that added fatigue, but they're performing really well from home.
Excellent. If it can be done, and if a way can be found, you just smash through it. I mean, it seems so simple, right? Someone saying here, thank you, Kamran and Rosa. This webinar is very eye-opening for me, so you're more than welcome. Thank you very much, Kamran and Rosa, for this link. It has been very informative, and your positivity is very uplifting. Now, that's all from the chat box, but I can see there's lots of stuff in the Q&A, so we have about 4 minutes left, and I want to get through as many of your questions as possible. Jessica, thank you very much for this. So Kamran, here we go. Challenging discrimination can be exhausting for people with disabilities, and many people cannot do so due to the time, energy, and effort it requires. How can this honestly and realistically be changed? Now, Kamran, I know you do a lot of work in policy, trying to change the policies. I know that you work at higher levels. So Jessica's wanting to know, how can this realistically and practically be changed?
I would say get support from other local groups. Find a local group that you can connect with. It might be a local disabled people's organizations. It may be other organizations, but there are often also organizations related to your health condition that you can often get support from, and that can often be quite important, really important. If you're in the workplace and you have a disability network, absolutely engage with that group. Find who the people are. If the organization has a union, connect with them so you can get some support from people to do exactly that, to challenge the inequality. You know, you don't have to do it on your own.
Yeah, and why not use those super skills that we have? If you're strong on research or in the area of policies, maybe you want to join an organization and make a difference too, and be an activist and an advocate through the actual 9 to 5 that you do if you're passionate about this, just like you're demonstrating, Kamran. Here's it again from Jessica. Would it be much more efficient to implement a universal design approach? I know a developing country where it is compulsory for all the buildings and pedestrian areas to be accessible, full stop. Why has this not been implemented in the UK, which is a developed country?
Yeah, good question. And that's a fantastic question. Absolutely agree. Inclusive design has to be at the heart of everything we do. And that's not just the built environment, but it's everything else as well. So whether it's IT equipment, software, if we design accessibility from the ground up, then there is no such thing as kind of assistive tech, because it's all built in, it's part of it. But yeah, absolutely, universal design is the way forward. There is a movement in the UK around inclusive design practices, and it's certainly worth looking at that. But absolutely, that's the kind of world I look forward to, where when we design a new building, we design it with everybody in mind who's going to use it.
Absolutely. But then that means that the designers themselves would have to come from diverse backgrounds or diverse domain.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is making sure that disabled people feel empowered and interested in working in those industries, because the more of our community that works there, the more inclusivity gets built in by default.
By default, exactly. Here's 1 or 2 questions from M&A, and then we'll probably finish, guys. What process do you go through to find out government consultations were illegal, as for example with the National Disability Strategy? In pushing for adjustments, have there been experiences where an employee's workplace has become hostile? What organizations can help in this situation? That's a big one, Kamran.
Yes. So the first one from the first part of that was, so news today or last night, we heard that the National Disability Strategy is unlawful. It took 4 brilliant individual disabled people to take government to task on that. How do we do that? So I mentioned earlier, we've got a policy team. So it's part of their job to take on responsibility for key areas like education, employment, housing, transport. And it's their job to be scouring kind of, there's a couple of websites that we look at where our organization subscribes to, and they have access to all the political things that are going on, government consultations, government debates, and we make sure that we are up to date on all of those, and making sure that we're putting submissions in. And you can see on our website the submissions that we put in, The second part was, sorry, Rosa, what was the second part?
So it was, what process do you put to find out if the government consultations were illegal, as for example, the National Disability Strategy? And then the second part was, in pushing for adjustments, have there been experiences where an employee's workplace has become hostile? What organizations can help in
Right.
this situation, Cameron?
So I think if an organization's become hostile place for a disabled person, then I think, you may try having that conversation, but it feels like if it's become hostile, that's probably not going to work. So I think that's when you take it up a notch and you contact an organization like DRUK, and we put you in touch with solicitors and lawyer firms that can then help you to take that case up kind of under legislation. Also, as I keep saying, if you've got the union within your business, it's unionized, such as Unison, for example, is one union, is absolutely be a union member, because you will get support and advocacy support and from them as well.
There was actually a question here from Fiona G. Can you advise me if it off a union to join for disabled people? Fiona, you're okay, but Cameron's just mentioned one. Cameron, are there others? Because there's probably national unions and maybe more localized unions for industry sectors. Am I right in saying that?
There will be. There's not a specific union just for disabled staff and disabled workers, but I would encourage you, all the big unions absolutely have disabled specialists within them. So find out, depending on where you work, Fiona, or anyone else, and see if it's got a union attached to it. But also, we could probably give you some resources to highlight some of the main unions out there.
Okay, thank you. Please let us know what they are, Cameron, because we can send out some links as well. We have put in the chat box that participatory link that you mentioned earlier about what people can do, and you mentioned there were some great templates, etc., on that. It looks like that's it. There's been some really interesting questions, and people have sort of shared their journeys and their stories. Tell me, Kamran, well, I've got one question for you. What's on the agenda for Disability Rights UK in 2022? What are the big things you're focusing on this year?
So, gosh, that's a big topic, but the big issues are often the ones that we already know about. It's things like social care, access to education and employment, the big topics, travel, housing. They're the kind of big things that we're working on. As someone has just mentioned, the disability strategy that was released has just been seen as being unlawful. So it's kind of what now, what next? How do we make sure that the government really steps up and does thorough consultation and engagement with disabled people in our organizations to make sure that the whole idea of this levelling up agenda, that disabled people are at the absolute heart of it, that our rights are there at the center of it, so that we can actually absolutely be included as citizens, as contributors to our country. And that's kind of, they're the big issues. So housing, social care, all of those things remain the topics that we work on. And people can look at our strategic areas on our website. If you go to About Us, it's on there.
Thank you. Kamran, well, I would just like to say on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for your time today. Your time is very precious, and you do a big, bold job there at Disability Rights UK. And we really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today and your pearls of wisdom and your insights. It's been so informative. We will be sending out a survey, everyone, so please feel free to complete that. It lets us know how you found today's session, and also it lets us know what you would like the future webinars to be. Kamran, thank you again. Carol, thank you for joining us, and Claire, thank you also for being here. If you want to see any further information with regards to this whole space, please do go on to our Hive section. We have a dedicated tab that talks specifically to disability rights and access to work. So please check out the Hive. Our next webinar is really going to be more a careers educational webinar. We're going to be helping to support you understand and identify the difference between strengths and skills, and how to use your transferable skills. So please feel free to register for that webinar. It's in the About Us section of the Evenbreak website. So without further ado, we're going to sign off. Thank you very much for joining us today, and take good care. See you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.